Monsters have been the face of our irrational fears and captured our imaginations since the beginning of civilization. Like our fears, they come in all shapes and sizes and meet us in our nightmares. They can be physical manifestations of evil, serve as metaphors that reflect our current anxieties, or they can be cautionary tales about the consequences of man's meddling with the natural order. Movies have been the perfect medium to explore the darker corners of our minds and help create the iconic representations that we will forever associate with these movie monsters. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thanks for stopping by. This is part 2 of my werewolf episode of Movie Monsters. If you want to check out part 1, which is the rest of the timeline, then go ahead and look down in the description where I will provide you with a link. We have a ton of good movies to talk about, so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and dive into it. In 1985, Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf novella was adapted in Silver Bullet. Silver Bullet is the Wonder Years meets the Wolfman. It starred Corey Haim as a young paraplegic boy named Marty, who was given a souped-up, high-powered wheelchair by his drunk uncle, played by none other than everybody's drunk uncle, Gary Busey. Bodies start stacking up, and seemingly it's up to Marty, his sister, and their uncle to find out who is responsible. But the situation gets hairy when Marty begins to suspect that this isn't a man at all, but a monster. It plays out like a whodunit murder mystery, and is one of my favorites on the list. The nightmare that takes place in the church service and the werewolf hunt scene are both my favorites. I mean, if you saw part 1 of the video, then you know how much I love fog. And if you saw my vampire series, then you know how much I love bats. In 1987, Shane Black and Fred Dekker taught audiences that the Wolfman indeed has nards in Monster Squad.
Do it! Wolfman's got nards!
It brings back the classic Universal monsters in a movie that's essentially Goonies meets Dracula and his band of worthless henchmen, including Gilman, the Mummy, and of course, Wolfman. I loved this movie as a kid, but honestly, I was a little mixed when I rewatched it for this video. Stan Winston did do the effects in this one, and I always thought that the Wolfman and the creature from the Black Lagoon were awesome designs, and they actually look awesome for high-end Halloween costumes. It's a horror comedy mashup that, unfortunately, isn't very scary or funny, but it has enough novelty charm and goofy moments to make it worth a watch. Another horror comedy featuring werewolves named Waxworks was released in 1988. It stars Dude from Gremlins and Tattoo from Fantasy Island. In it, a group of teens, and I use that term loosely, are invited into a wax museum that features a bunch of famous monsters. You know, the same unlicensed Universal monsters from Monster Squad. After hours, the guests are able to be lured into the exhibits where they come to life. It's like Night at the Museum, with murder. The werewolf scene happens when a man wanders into the exhibit where he ends up in a log cabin with somebody who's actually turning into a werewolf. Look at those ears. It's the Easter Bunny from hell. That same year, audiences were introduced to a new kind of wolf, one of the fox variety, the Michael J. Fox variety. I'm sorry. I'm talking about Teen Wolf. It's basically a superhero origin story about an average high school kid that realizes he is a werewolf. Once the transformations begin, though, he becomes a basketball sensation and the coolest kid in school, until a fellow student shoots him dead with a silver bullet. That actually doesn't happen. Truthfully, it ends up being a sports movie about a player that overcomes his reliance on performance-enhancing drugs. It's fun 80s cheese, and it's actually earned a spot in Americana. Jack Nicholson, Michelle Pfeiffer, and James Spader lead an all-star cast in 1994's Wolf. Nicholson plays a wealthy publisher that was recently demoted and replaced by rival James Spader. Afterward, he gets bitten by a wolf and uses his newfound animalistic prowess to outmaneuver Spader's character and eventually get the promotion he was after. The Wolfman seems like the ideal role for Nicholson, But the movie never really reaches the highs that it should have. But all things considered, it's got a great cast and is a different take on the mythos that any completionist shouldn't miss. And where else can you see Wolfman Jack actually pissing on James Spader's shoes? 1996's Bad Moon is a little genre gem that honestly few people have seen. It's an adaptation of a book called Thor, which is the name of the family dog. The story starts out in Nepal, where a man named Ted and his girlfriend are attacked by a werewolf. After he gets a nasty bite, he's able to blow the creature's brains out, but only after the thing kills his girlfriend. Shortly after the incident, he moves into a remote area near his sister and nephew to start to rebuild his life, and then the mangled bodies start piling up. Thor becomes suspicious of Ted's strange behavior before anyone else. Ted continues to transform at night and kill locals, but because the bodies look like they were attacked by an animal, officials come and take Thor to the pound. Shortly after, Werewolf Ted transforms and attacks his sister. During the confrontation, her son is able to go and set Thor free. He and the dog show up just in time to save the day. The werewolf in this film looks really good if you can just get past that horrible transformation scene. It's actually one of my favorite designs. And I love any movie where the family dog ends up being the hero at the end. If you would have asked me in 1997 what my favorite werewolf movie was, I'd have told you it was An American Werewolf in Paris. It sort of follows the basic formula of the original, but with a much more intricate story involving a cult that develops a serum which allows them to transform at will. The movie has an incredible soundtrack and a likable cast, including the wonderful Julie Delpy. Problem is, said werewolves look like shit. The thing looks like a were-rat. Rick Baker didn't do the effects in this movie. Instead, the filmmakers decided to go with CGI. Really shitty, already dated CGI. Is that a dick nose? It was in development for 6 years, and it feels overproduced. That said, it's still a pretty fun ride. The next movie is a macabre little oddity called Ginger Snaps. It's about two goth sisters that are infatuated by death to the point that they spend their free time photographing dead animals and mock-up suicides. Ginger, the hotter of the two sisters, is bitten by a werewolf after starting her first period. She starts to go through mental and physical changes that cause a rift between her and her younger sister. The movie is an allegory about growing into womanhood, which, you know, as a dude, it's never a spin I'd really even thought of before. It's low budget and the werewolf looks like shitty animatronics in Halloween Horror Nights or something, but it's a different take and the off-kilter tone makes it a must-see. Neil Marshall has had an impressive career as a director, and 2002's Dog Soldiers was his debut. It's sort of like The Predator in that a group of soldiers find themselves deep in the wilderness fighting off seemingly unstoppable forces. Thing is, unlike Dutch and his crew of gigantic muscular mercenaries, these guys stumbled into the hunting grounds of a hungry wolf pack while doing a training exercise, which means they have no ammo and are severely underprepared. There's not much of a plot, and the second act reveal is a big who gives a shit moment, but what the movie lacks in bark, it more than makes up for in bite. See what I did there? What can I say about the Lycan vs. Vampire movie Underworld that hasn't been said already? It's a 2003 movie that consists of monsters, martial arts, the color blue, and tight black leather. It's a ripoff of The Crow, Blade, The Matrix, and tons of other superior films. But the werewolves look really rad, and the original kicked off a pretty popular franchise that's kept director's wife Kate Beckinsale working. You know, like Resident Evil's done for Mila Jovovich. And Twilight was a thing that happened. In 2010, Universal went back to the well with their reboot of The Wolfman. This time they cast a few heavy hitters, including Benicio del Toro, Emily Blunt, Hugo Weaving, and Sir Anthony Hopkins himself. Sadly, not even they could save this movie from its own mediocrity. There's some great effects and gore in this movie, save for the god-awful transformation scene, which, compared to The Howling or An American Werewolf in London, it looks cheap and unconvincing. But I shouldn't dismiss it though. Some of the early scenes capture the feeling of a Universal monster movie. However, the end completely undoes everything leading up to it. Such a stupid ending. On the other side of the coin, we have the absolutely batshit Wolf Cop. It's a grindhouse-style horror comedy that was released back in 2014. Like the title implies, it's a movie about a cop that is a werewolf. As if a werewolf police officer isn't absurd enough in the first place, he eventually ends up doing battle with a cult of lizard people. Seriously. Wolf Cop plays like Teen Wolf meets Machete. I think it's on Netflix, so be sure to check it out. 2014 also saw the release of Late Phases. It stars Nick D'Amici as a blind Gulf War vet that was attacked by a werewolf. It left him injured and his seeing eye dog dead. After the attacks, he began to suspect that a werewolf was responsible, so he starts investigating the people in the town. The movie has a similar vibe to Silver Bullet, at least in that a disabled person is left to solve a series of grisly murders committed by a werewolf. D'Amici's character gets a silver bullet made and then booby traps his house, waiting for the inevitable confrontation between him and the monster that killed his German shepherd. The movie is badass. It's great to see a hero whose weakness becomes their strength. D'Amici is a great actor and carries this film with gravitas and machismo. With plans of a universal shared monster universe, rest assured that we'll be seeing another incarnation of the Wolfman soon. I'm pretty convinced that they aren't gonna be the movies I want them to be. I'm a horror movies fan, not an action movie with monsters in it fan. I'll be on the lookout for smaller budget films made by passionate filmmakers as opposed to committees, and I'll be sure to share those with you. Obviously, this is just a brief overview of the history of werewolves in film. There's no way to discuss all of them in such a short period of time, but hopefully this timeline of major milestones will offer you a little insight into the evolution of the werewolf, as well as give you some classics to seek out. What's your favorite werewolf movie? If you enjoyed this episode, click the like button and subscribe to keep up to date with the rest of the Movie Monsters series.